Over this past year, mental health has just become so much more important, and leaders today are facing challenges that we've never, previously faced or heard of even. So how do they make mental health a priority? How do they recognize some of those symptoms, and maybe they need to step behind, look at the big picture? What sort of advice do you have for them?
Well, I've heard from many leaders this year, all across different sectors in Canada, and this has been a difficult year. I think a common trait among leaders is that we typically are, we're high performing. Mm-hmm. We have a lot on the go. We're very busy, and in many ways, we like it that way. I think the silent threat to leaders is certainly burnout. And so for leaders, my biggest advice is to practice pausing, to practice stepping back. And it sounds, simple, and in some way it is, but it's also the hardest thing to do. Mm-hmm. When you thrive on performing and you thrive on being busy, and the responsibility that a leadership role brings, it's difficult. It's easy rather to get caught up in that. And teaching leaders to be mindful enough to actually press pause and take a self-inventory is my biggest advice. So there are many ways to do it, and many strategies you might employ, but whatever way you can as a leader, you need to find a way to take stock of your own health. And it's more important now than it ever has been.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you're saying that, because, when you ask leaders to take that pause, it's almost looked at as if they're wasting their time. They have so many things to do, but it's that pause that really gives them that much more fuel to keep going, right?
That's exactly it. I think leaders may be surprised when they do that, how much they're able to refocus their energy. And I think as well that, leaders have a responsibility to their people, and that can be rather a key source of stress and strain. And one of the reasons leaders tend to keep going and going and going is often because they know that there are people depending on them. But I think, certainly supporting their teams is something they need to be doing. But the other thing I will say is that often good leaders create teams that care. And we forget that our teams care about us too. Mm-hmm. And so that's another perspective that I would encourage leaders to think about, is you spend a lot of time and energy, very likely, caring for your teams. Is there a way that you can let your team care for you? It doesn't have to be a one-sided relationship. And in fact, it can be really beneficial when it goes both ways, but that requires a little bit of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, I love that. Now, going back to your education, so you graduated from your master's program in 2013, and then you quickly rose up to national director at Canadian Mental Health Association. Now you have your own company. Congratulations on that. Can you share a little bit about that journey to, getting where you are today?
Yeah, and I mean, it's been a little bit of right place, right time, followed by, I suppose, a healthy sense of naivety that has, I think, really helped me. So, I think the motivation to move into a leadership role came from some of the clinical experience that I had early on in my career. And I was working with young men, primarily between 20 to 40, recovering from psychotic disorders. And my job was to be their single point of connection into the mental health system. And I think what I found and what frustrated me most is the fact that the system of supports that was supposed to be there to help these young men recover really wasn't a system, and in many cases really wasn't there at all. And so it was incredibly frustrating. Just the systemic barriers were immense, and for that population in particular, very difficult to overcome. And so I started looking for ways to make a broader impact. And that's what really pushed me into that first leadership position with CMHA. And in some ways that was, again, the right place, right time, the right relationships that helped me get there, but also a bit of bold naivety and a willingness to jump in without knowing what's in the water. And so that was an incredibly fun experience for me. I was solving a lot of problems in a very small organization. And then from there, I ended up building great relationships with the national office, and it were those relationships that were able to provide me with an opportunity to work then at a national level. And the focus on workplace mental health really came in as a side interest. It is something I've been curious about for some time, I've been learning about in different points, and I think what I liked about it was that, the workplace is an environment where you can affect change for a lot of people. And so if we look at it from a settings-based approach, where do most people find themselves in life? Either in school or in work. And so if you can change the fish tank, so to speak, to be healthy, you can impact a lot of people. And so that, I think, continued to pique my interest, and had a great opportunity to develop that interest even further.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a sort of that metaphor when you're gardening and you plant something, you want to make sure that the soil is healthy. So it's like the environment. Yeah.
That's exactly it. And I think it also underscores, for those aspiring leaders out there, the importance of good relationships. And perhaps that's obvious, but I think approaching relationships from an authentic perspective. I know that young professionals do a lot of networking. And of course, there's, an inherent motivation behind that networking from a career perspective. But I can't say I've done a lot of that. But what I have done is focused on just establishing really authentic, intentional relationships with people that I like. And what's been doing is that those relationships have always paid dividends, and I've never intended for them to, but they always have. And so I think as a leader, I think if you can, even as an aspiring leader, if you can focus on building meaningful, authentic relationships, those will inevitably and eventually pay dividends either in your personal life or in your professional life. And I would say that there's benefit both ways. So if you're an aspiring leader, focus on building authentic relationships with people that are either doing things that you find interesting or simply people that you appreciate and enjoy. Those are the relationships that are ultimately going to fuel you to success.
Yeah, relationships are really what carry us forward, right? We can only do so much as a single person, as one person, but it's that team or the other people around us.
And I would say that they're also, they're the foundation of our own ability to be resilient too. We need those people that we can lean on, that we can count on. And many professional connections that I've made have of course morphed into personal connections. And in times of stress, they're often some of my greatest supports.